Hi kids, and welcome to another amazing day of our summer reading program, and it is Daniel Boone Day. And I have a Daniel Boone book that you can check out right here at the library, and I'm going to read it to you. Daniel Boone, Trailblazer. Daniel Boone, Trailblazer. High on a knoll in the Pennsylvania backwoods in 1734, the small cabin was home to a Quaker family. It pleasured Squire and Sarah Boone that their sixth child was a boy. They named him Daniel. Daniel's mother taught him to read, write, and cipher numbers. Spelling baffled Daniel, but he purely loved to read. Daniel took his tracking and hunting in the woods with his Indian friends. In Daniel's 12th year, his father gave him a long rifle. He became such an expert rifleman that folks said he could shoot a tick off a wildcat's nose from 100 yards. As homesteaders flocked to the Pennsylvania countryside, Daniel's father decided it was time to move his family to North Carolina. They needed elbow room. It was there in the Yadkin Valley that Daniel set his sights on Rebecca Bryan. They soon married and commenced housekeeping. By then, Daniel had gained a reputation as one of the country's best woodsmen. Daniel often went on long hunts, sometimes alone and sometimes with 3 or 4 hunting companions. Days led to weeks, and weeks led to months that Daniel was gone. During the hunts, he carved messages in trees. He usually carved in beech trees because they had smooth bark and grew slowly. When he carved deeply, bark would not grow over the message. He used these carvings as boundary lines, guides for others to follow, and fun records of his journey. His carvings could be found far and wide. One tree bore the words, D. Boone killed a bear on tree in the year 1760. Another carving delivered the message, D. Boone camped here. When he hunted in cold, wet weather, Daniel found a good night's sleep in the comfort of a cave. Sometimes on cool, frosty nights, he curled up deep inside a bearskin or piled leaves around himself. Other times, he cut bark from a tree and wrapped up in it to keep warm. One day, when Daniel was back home, an old friend, John Finley, paid the Boones a visit. The dust hadn't settled before they began talking about a place the Iroquois called Kentucky. Finley told Daniel about woods filled with so much wild game that a hunter had to be careful not to get run over. Daniel began to ponder ideas about the Kentucky wilderness. A wanderlust got under his skin, and he began to fester like a boil. When he could stand it no more, Daniel headed out for Kentucky with his gun, tick liquor, and his favorite book, Gulliver's Travels. Daniel journeyed on horseback. As he neared the gap of a mountain, Daniel felt the earth tremble. He heard a roar of thunder as plain as day, and he spied the clear blue sky, his mind filled with wonderment. Then he saw the approaching storm. A thundering herd of buffalo stampeded across a far-flung Kentucky grassland. Daniel loved this wild land. So when Richard Henderson offered him the job of leading 30 huntsmen to Kentucky to cut a path, he obliged. On March 10, 1775, axes rang as Daniel and the men began blazing the 208-mile-long Wilderness Road. On April 1, 1775, the woodsmen had cleared a path to the Kentucky River. Boone declared the meadow near the river the end of the Wilderness Road, and they built a fort. Daniel's pay for his work was 2,000 acres of land, and the naming of the fort, Fort Boonesborough, in his honor. Daniel was ever mindful of the wild game around the fort, and knew that without a good supply of meat, the people in the fort would not survive. He soon called a meeting to announce a law: no wasting of game. A few weeks later, Daniel returned home to North Carolina. There, he found not only his family, but also, not more than 50 miles away, another family, which had built a cabin practically in the Boone's backyard. That's when Daniel told Rebecca they needed more elbow room. The Boone family set out for Fort Boonesboro. In a short time, other families followed their lead and moved to the fort. Life at Boonesboro was hard. Everybody worked. Even the children helped plant gardens and raise crops. Before long, Daniel got wind of bad news. He did not have a legal title to the 2,000 acres of land given to him for his work on the Wilderness Road. Disappointed, the Boone family headed westward, where new land brought new promise. Daniel busied himself running a store and leading families into Kentucky to live. Even Abraham Lincoln's family followed Boone westward. Daniel also surveyed land for people who staked claims. He and his sons used knives to carve boundary marks into the bark of trees. By 1781, Daniel Boone was one of the richest men in Kentucky. He had surveyed and claimed 100,000 acres of land. Whoa, that's a lot. This was his reward for opening the West for settlement while receiving little or no pay. But the rewards were short-lived. A notch in a tree was often the only boundary mark Daniel made. However, a year's growth of bark can cover the carving, especially if the mark was carved in a tree with thick bark. When Daniel's marks were covered, other surveyors marked different boundaries and laid claim to the land. Daniel lost his land in the courts. What land he didn't lose, he had to sell to pay off debts to the people who had hired him to survey. They too had lost their land. Boone was no longer a landowner, but he had become famous. He worked with the legislature to make Kentucky a county of Virginia and later worked to make Kentucky a state. In 1798, a county was named Boone in his honor. Disappointed that the forests were no longer great hunting grounds, Daniel headed farther west. He again needed elbow room. He and Rebecca moved their family to Missouri, where Boone was given a tract of land. To satisfy his wandering nature, he explored new territory. Bad luck with land deals seemed to follow Daniel no matter how often he moved or how far. In Missouri, Daniel once again lost land due to boundary claims. One day when Daniel was in his 80s, a young man named Chester Harding called on him to paint his portrait. Harding asked Daniel if he had ever been lost, wandering alone in the forest for months at a time. No, Daniel declared, I can't say I was ever lost, but I was bewildered once for 3 days. Daniel and Rebecca lived out their lives in the Missouri wilderness. Daniel was content with many of his 10 children living nearby, and with a passel of grandchildren ever begging Grandpa for just one more story about his days as a trailblazer. The end. While this was a little longer book, you get more in-depth detail into Daniel Boone, who he was, what he did, his strengths and his struggles. And it's very interesting to learn about our past and learn about our history as a state. Now, kids, come with me to get a tour of Daniel Boone's cabin. Hi, kids, and welcome to today's summer reading program. And we are in the Daniel Boone cabin right here in our hometown. So let's go through a little tour. We have the door, little bench and a window. We have the fireplace for cooking. Another door. Over here is a table of information and stuff set up for you guys. There is a bed, and above the bed there's a loft. We have a table, chair, dining area, a spinning wheel, a ladder leading up to the loft, and back to the door. And we will be sitting here where we are going to go over important things about Daniel Boone because it is Daniel Boone Day. And Daniel Boone is a valued man in our state, Kentucky. It is even believed that he is the pioneer man on our state flag who's shaking the statesman's hands. And the reason we value him is because he was one of the first white European settlers to come to Kentucky. He led an expedition during the French and Indian War time period through the Cumberland Gap, which is a gap in the mountains, and he led through the gap and found Kentucky, and he settled an area called Boonesboro after his name, Daniel Boone. Dun dun dun. And he had a very exciting life. He lived a long time. He was 80-something years old when he died, in fact. And when he came to Kentucky and created a fort, there were still Native Americans living here because they discovered America first. They were here, living here prior to the European settlers coming here. And when Daniel Boone came to the land and started building and taking territory, they did not like that. I wouldn't like it either. If someone came to my farm and started building stuff and taking my stuff away, would not like it. And the Native Americans did not like that. So first, they kidnapped his daughter. And then later on, they kidnapped him. And it was the Shawnee and Cherokee tribes, two major tribes in our home state of Kentucky. And while we do value and honor the Native Americans, we also value and honor Daniel Boone for his, discovery and everything. And we are in his cabin, which you guys can visit for free. It is next to Wentz Wildlife. Just go down the road right there. And you can come here, come visit. You can come inside, go around, go outside, get the full experience of what it was like to be a settler and a pioneer during this time period. And he was, really old when he died. He's 80-something years old. So he lived a long life. He wasn't in Kentucky all of his life. He left Europe for religious freedom. His parents were Quakers, which means, they were pacifists. They had certain beliefs, and those beliefs were not liked in Europe. So they came to America, where we have religious freedom. And, and then later on in his life, he even ended up moving to Missouri. He had 10 kids with his wife, and he was married to his wife for 24 years. That's a long time. He believed all you need in life, good wife, good gun, good life. He really enjoyed to hunt, as you get older, maybe that's something you do in your families and stuff. On the farm, go hunting during the different seasons and whatnot. And so that was something he did. But back then, you had to hunt. That's how you got your food. Today, we can go to the dollar store, go to Save-A-Lot. Not them, not back then. During that time period, they had to hunt and kill for their food. Luckily, we don't do that anymore. Get our stuff nicely prepared, boxed, frozen. But this was just a different time period. And it is great that we can experience this time period and celebrate Daniel Boone Day in our hometown. Now, summer reading program is going on all month. This is just one of the days. If you haven't picked up your stuff yet, you can come pick it up. We even have prizes. If you get a bingo on one of the cards, you guys have lots of cards. You can't bring them all in at once. But you get a bingo on one card, bring that card in, then start the next one and bring them in and get prizes. Have a good day, kids.